welcome to the experience. I have Jen with me here. My name's Abram. We're just going to kind of go through a little bit about your job.
Yeah.
And what your experience is like.
Great.
First question is, tell me about your work.
Yeah. So I currently work as a certified nurse midwife locally. I have actually been doing that job for over 17 years, 12 years here in town, and worked 5 years before that in Minnesota and was a nurse for a couple of years before that. So I've been in healthcare for a total of 20 years. But yeah, that's what I do. So certified nurse midwives provide care largely to people in the reproductive years. We focus largely on women, although that certainly has become a broader spectrum as things like gender identity and how people self-identify have kind of moved into the world. So I will probably sometimes say women or mothers and realize that I don't intend for that to be non-inclusive. But yeah, so we take care of people. We're primary care providers, actually, which is surprising to a lot of people. They think that we only deal with pregnancy and birth, and that's really not the case. We do have a specialty in pregnancy and birth, though. So that's a big bulk of what I do is take care of people during pregnancy, take care of birthing people, and take care of them in the postpartum period as well.
Nice.
So
that was always an area that I just, because I'm also a nurse, that I just kind of avoided.
That's good. That's fine. I avoid all the stuff you do, so it works out great.
Yeah. Okay. In your experience, how has your work changed in recent years?
Yeah, it's changed a lot. And even not in super recent years. I think about, when I first started way back 20 years ago as a nurse, I feel like we really were sort of able to just focus on caring for the patients. And we had a lot of fun, too. We'd have potlucks at the nurse's station. All this and that. And as regulations sort of got tighter and tighter on things, and as sort of the political climate changed, I definitely noticed some differences. One thing, which I think largely was a positive change, but the Affordable Care Act during President Obama's presidency, I saw some pretty positive changes from that. So when I first became a midwife, I remember having patients who were like, oh, please don't put down on my chart that I have this particular diagnosis, like diabetes or whatever the case is, because they're like, I could lose my insurance. Or I'm thinking of making a job change and I can't have that on my chart because if I get new insurance, they won't cover me if I have a pre-existing condition.
Right.
And it's funny because I think a lot of people have already forgotten about that and what that was like to live with that.
Yeah, it was horrendous.
It was awful. People literally couldn't leave their jobs because they were like, I won't be able to get healthcare coverage.
Yeah. It's weird how dependent we are on that. And even having healthcare sometimes isn't the greatest.
Yeah. I have a good friend who, is a professor at UWL and, she's worked much of her career as an adjunct. And the first time she was able to get affordable healthcare was once the exchange opened and she was able to get insurance on the exchange. So that was not recent history, but that really did shift some things. It also did make healthcare premiums more expensive for other people. So that was difficult too. Yeah. We started kind of seeing this rise in deductibles. I think it was related to more than just the Affordable Care Act, but that definitely didn't always help. So that's one thing too. It used to be things were covered, and once people paid a fairly low out of pocket, then everything was covered. And now we're seeing these high deductible insurance levels where, people are like, I got to pay $10,000 out of pocket before anything is covered.
Right. It's detrimental.
So that's been a big shift too. And really just trying to pay attention to price and cost of things and keep that lower for patients.
Right. Yeah. And I feel like I try to be conscientious about that.
Yeah.
Like saying like, oh, well, this would cost about this much. This would cost about this much. Yeah. I really wish that we had more tools as providers to be able to look up those prices.
There's not any transparency.
No.
So people will say, how much does this chlamydia test cost? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's about $600 the last time I looked, but also it depends on your insurance. Your insurance may cover every penny of it. It might cover none of it. I don't know. Yeah. And it's really difficult.
Right.
And you figure if it's hard for us to navigate that working in the system, what is that like for patients that maybe don't have any healthcare literacy.
Right. So, and then it kind of goes to show how many people just avoid healthcare altogether until it's something serious.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. As far as reproductive healthcare goes, how has that changed for you in recent years?
Yeah, it's changed dramatically. It's kind of interesting. So, we started, Roe v. Wade being overturned is obviously a huge event in reproductive health that has had a pretty big impact on things. But even before that, we were seeing these rumbles of change, right? You've had states that were passing these early pregnancy laws regarding abortion, so saying like, oh, you can have an abortion as long as it's before 6 weeks. Well, guess what? Most people don't know they're pregnant until they're at least 6 weeks pregnant, if not significantly further along. And so that, I think, very intentional in those states. Yeah. Or you have to have a transvaginal ultrasound in order to get an abortion, and you have to look at the screen. I mean, they're trying to manipulate people. So you were starting to hear rumblings of that, and it was starting to instill some fear, I think, in people. Definitely, Trump getting elected the first time started kind of a big shift. So even though initially that didn't necessarily change any laws, I definitely had people coming to me and saying, hey, I'm worried about my rights. I'm worried about what's going to be legal and not legal. So one thing I found was a lot of people, changing out their IUDs early. So they would come and say, hey, listen, I know I have a couple of years left on this, but I'm really worried about what the next 4 years are going to bring. So can I please get a new one early? And I was like, yep, you sure can. We'll just, we'll just do it. Yeah. And actually, I never really felt the need to justify it and never found any issues with doing that. So, it was difficult. So that was tricky, and there was a lot of fear. And luckily, some of those fears didn't come true. You did have places like Hobby Lobby who were like, we're not covering birth control for our employees. Yeah. That kind of thing. And then fast forward to Roe v. Wade being overturned, and that was really big. The hospital and healthcare system that I work for has, the place I work directly does not do any terminations. We don't do elective abortions. Sure. We don't do abortions of any kind, really. Yeah. We do treat ectopic pregnancies. So an ectopic pregnancy is one where the pregnancy is growing outside of the uterus and therefore is not sustainable and is life-threatening to the person carrying that fetus. Yeah. So, yep. Yeah. Pretty much 100%. I mean, you'll find the very rare case study of like, oh, this person managed to feed a fetus off her liver for, but we're talking that is like a 1 in a many million chance. So, an ectopic pregnancy in a fallopian tube 100% of the time will never be a viable pregnancy. Right. And so that's something that traditionally our practice would treat. Yeah. We would either give a medication or we'd do surgery to remove, the tube or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And it was really interesting. The other thing we would do is, if we had a situation where sorry, you're going to want to edit that one out. I'm going to wait because that's going to be part of it. And so it was really interesting. There was this sudden shift in, I would say, perceptible fear among us providers about, well, what are we going to do? As soon as Roe v. Wade was overturned, we didn't have much time to prepare for it. The documents were leaked, and so we had a little bit of time to prepare. But essentially, we didn't know what was okay and what wasn't, because Wisconsin had this old law on the books from the 1800s. Yeah. Essentially saying that abortion was illegal. And it's difficult because abortion can mean so many things, right? So someone who has a natural miscarriage, that's called a spontaneous abortion. So people will sometimes see that in their chart and get worried. And we're like, no. It doesn't mean you chose to end the pregnancy. This is just, abortion means just end of a pregnancy. Yeah. And so all of a sudden we were like, my gosh, can we even take care of people for ectopic pregnancies? Right. You're faced with this sort of like, okay, do I choose jail or do I choose being sued? or choose hurting someone. Like, we don't want any of those things. We just want to take care of people.
Yeah. You want
and so,
patient.
Yeah. And it really became difficult. Like for a while, we were like, okay, so if we get an ectopic, are we going to ship them across the border to Minnesota? Sure, it's great that we're a border town and that it's close enough that we can do that, but also that extra hour and a half, 2 hours could mean someone's life. So I feel like now we're in a place where it's a little bit easier to do that life-saving care, but there are still other areas where it's not as clear, and I'll be honest, I'm always going to operate from the perspective of I'm going to take care of my patient and deal with the consequences.
Right.
But again, I don't do abortions. I can't prescribe, medical abortion for someone or anything like that. But it's interesting because there are lots of things that still you just wonder, like, well, gosh, how's that going to be interpreted?
Yeah, right. So, I think like initially when we went back to the 1800 law, like everything was off the table.
Everything.
Ectopic, any pregnancy. And I don't remember, I think it was like Idaho or somewhere else where they're like, well, we can't even teach people how to do this. Yeah. Which kind of like leads into my next question. How have the changes impacted the education of professionals like you?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I know in some states there are, programs that will teach providers how to do abortions, and those in some places had to completely close down because it became illegal to do them, and so therefore you can't teach them without doing them. Right. So that was an issue. So then that the trickle down of that is, well, then you have less providers that are trained in doing terminations. And we always think of abortion as just elective abortion, but there's also medical abortion, which we can get into later. But, basically an abortion that is treating some disease in the mother or essentially trying to save the pregnant person or whatnot. But so I think for sure there's been some education programs that have completely had to shut down. I imagine, and I don't know so much because it's been a long time since I've been in school, but I imagine that how these things are talked about in certain states has got to be really difficult too. And saying like, well, this is how you practice if you're in a state that doesn't have any, strict abortion laws or restrictions. But if you're in a state where, that's the case, then this is how you do it. There's certain things we deal with where we really do handle them a little differently now in terms of trying not to get in trouble. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's so weird because it makes you feel like you're cheating or you're doing something wrong.
Yeah. I'm not.
I'm going to try to save my patient no matter what happens. Yeah. Like that's your goal.
Yeah. Exactly.
So having that like contradictory situations.
Right. I just want to be able to care for people and not have to worry about, am I going to get in trouble for this? Yeah. Yeah. It's silly. That's worse than silly, but it's a tragedy really in some cases. Yeah. I mean, you hear the dramatic stories about the 10-year-old girl who was raped and had, was denied an abortion and had to try to travel several states. That's not just a glamorous story. That is happening. Right. It's happening everywhere. And not everybody has the means or the resources to travel for the health care that they need. Yeah. So that's really devastating, which is just basically, it's really unfair because it's putting all this extra pressure and extra impact on the people that already are impacted by this, right? So the people that are poor and can't afford to go get the care somewhere else, well, now they're going to have another kid. Now they're going to have more mouths to feed and no way to do it. And it just compounds the impact on them.
Snowball effect.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what are some of the great, because I feel like a lot of people try to make pregnancy and abortion a black and white issue.
Yeah. And it's anything but.
Yeah. And it's anything but. I think there's a lot of gray areas. And I'm wondering if you can kind of enlighten us on the gray areas of pregnancy that this is kind of impacting.
Absolutely. So I feel like ectopic pregnancy is one of them. Mm-hmm. Although I think the vast majority of people who really understand the actual medical concept of an ectopic pregnancy would agree that, like, okay, if your option is to let the mother die or okay, end the pregnancy in order to save her life. The vast majority of people, even I think very conservative people, are going to choose the former. But that's one gray area where it's like, listen, this may have been a very wanted pregnancy by someone, and this is devastating to them, but the fetus isn't going to survive if the pregnant person dies. So we need to look at that. The other one that I've even had to deal with personally is the issue of a viable pregnancy, but where the membranes rupture really early in pregnancy. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, someone is maybe 15 or 16 weeks along, which is very early. Yep. It's too early for a fetus to survive outside the body. I mean, the absolute earliest that can happen is about 23 weeks. Okay. And even that is extremely unlikely that early. But what happens is, so on rare occasion, someone's water can break that early, 14, 15, 16 weeks. And then the problem is the baby is so early in the pregnancy that the lungs can't develop because there's no fluid. Right. And so ultimately the chances of that fetus surviving are very, very small. Mm-hmm. They're not impossible. Occasionally people can be kept pregnant until the age of viability and then can have the baby. But those cases are extremely rare. I think that's important to know. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of cases, the baby doesn't survive. And or the pregnant person gets an infection. So that's the big risk is, okay, now the amniotic sac is broken, bacteria can get up inside there and can cause a life-threatening infection. Mm-hmm. And so traditionally the way that you would treat this, you would give options, right? You would say, okay, one option is to be extremely, hands off and say, you can go home and, the fetus has a heartbeat right now. You can go home and take your temperature twice a day. And if you develop a fever, chills, body aches, anything, we need to have you come back and we need to make sure that we get you treated and take care of this. Mm-hmm. The other option is to offer induction right away. So essentially we give the patient medication to essentially put them into labor and birth the baby, mm-hmm. knowing full well the baby is not going to survive once it's born. Right. And that our goal is not to end the pregnancy, but our goal is to treat the medical problem so that patient doesn't develop a life-threatening infection. Right. Because the uterus can get infected, which can then lead to sepsis. And I know you know all about sepsis in your line of work. Yeah. And it's extremely dangerous and can kill people and does kill people. So we used to be able to offer both of those things. Yeah. And now after Roe v. Wade, we're generally referring those patients out across the border to Minnesota, which is really unfortunate. Not that they're not being taken great care of, but there's a big problem with saying, okay, you've come here and now we've gone through all this testing and done all these things. And now guess what? You need to pack up your stuff and drive an hour and a half and do all this again. And so you need to ride home. There was even a question initially about whether or not I could even counsel patients on that option. And, because legal was getting, understandably a little nervous about I think just because it was so unprecedented, right? It's this ancient law that was not made for modern times. Right. They didn't understand process to begin with. No. And it can be interpreted in so many ways. So that's another gray area where, someone doesn't want to end a pregnancy, but maybe has a real medical need to. Yeah. Other gray areas include the one that comes to mind is really severe preeclampsia. So preeclampsia is a very common pregnancy complication where it's a syndrome. So it's kind of a combination of symptoms, including elevated blood pressure, elevated liver enzymes, elevated protein, and it can be and has been life-threatening to people. So if it's allowed to go unchecked, it can be extremely dangerous. It can lead to seizure and death. Mm-hmm. Bad. Yeah, very bad. Mm-hmm. And usually it shows up towards the end of pregnancy, 36, 37 weeks, at which point we can say, all right, it's safe to deliver this baby and treat the patient's high blood pressure, get them delivered. That's usually the cure. And then everyone gets better and is fine. Yeah. The problem is this can develop sometimes as early as 20, 22, 24 weeks. Mm-hmm. or earlier even, and then we're stuck going, okay, now what? We can't keep the mom pregnant because it will kill her.
Yeah.
And, and I know people this has happened to, where there was no way that baby was going to survive, but the mom wasn't going to survive. And, so then you're like, well, shoot, our only option really here is to, again, induce labor or take the baby. And that's a heart-wrenching decision for people.
Absolutely.
It's devastating. And it's really hard because you hear about all these people saying, oh, these late-term abortions or, second trimester abortions, and they don't understand all of the intricacies that go into those situations. The other thing is you will sometimes see abortions later in pregnancy just because the fetus has got some diagnosis that's inconsistent with life. So one that kind of comes to mind is anencephaly, which is a neural tube defect where babies basically don't have a brain.
Right.
So they have a brain stem.
Yeah.
So they can be born technically alive with a heartbeat and reflexes, but essentially there's no brain function because there's no actual brain.
Yeah.
And in some places, people will choose to terminate those pregnancies. Again, we don't do that here locally, but that's a difficult situation where someone very much has wanted this baby.
Yeah.
But there's also risk to that pregnancy continuing. There's a super high chance of preeclampsia. There's a high chance of complications during and after birth, including hemorrhage and some other things. Yeah. So that's another gray area where people don't understand that ending a pregnancy later on is it's not happening because people don't want to be pregnant.
Right.
This idea, this sort of like weird, vacuous idea of, people are deciding at 38 weeks that they don't want to be pregnant and they're going in and having an elective abortion is absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. That just is not happening.
Yeah, I'm like 100% sure, but I really got upset when I heard, sometimes they offer to kill the baby after birth or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm like, that is like...
It doesn't happen.
Sure, that's never been a thing.
It's absolutely not a thing.
Yeah. I just
if it's born alive. Yeah.
It's just...
Some do, unfortunately. And it's difficult because they don't believe it when they hear it from people who actually work with this population.
Yeah. Do it for a living.
Yeah. Right? The other thing I was going to say is, kind of back to I hate the term late-term abortion because that's not a real thing. So there's nothing called a late-term abortion. We separate it generally by trimester, right? First trimester, second, and third. So a third trimester abortion, meaning an abortion after 28 weeks, the highest percentage of people having an abortion in the third trimester are children. And I think that's a really important statistic. And we're not talking 17-year-olds.
No.
The definition of children being, I could be wrong on this, so don't quote me completely, but sure. I think it's 15 or below. So we're talking children. Yeah. And so oftentimes these are cases where they were raped by a family member or, molested or whatnot and didn't know they were pregnant or hid the pregnancy. And all of a sudden they're 30 weeks along and then we're just finding out and they're like, I'm not going to give birth to my uncle's baby. So it's important to keep in mind that there are so many reasons for these happening that people don't understand unless you're really involved with it.
Right. And I think if I think to protesters and things like that, I don't think they realize how many people want to keep their child.
Yeah.
It's just the circumstance makes it impossible.
Yeah.
And it's already a heartbreaking thing to experience.
Absolutely devastating.
And then you have to see these people or these signs that just are awful towards. It boggles my mind.
Yeah. It re-injures the already really hurt person for sure.
Yeah. It's awful. Kicking them while they're down, but you're already at the bottom. It's awful.
Yeah, so it's been devastating. I mean, I remember when I heard the news about Roe v. Wade, I truly sobbed. I just sobbed. I thought about how that was going to affect my patients and my friends and my daughters and myself, and it was really difficult.
Yeah.
And I remember, a male friend saying, it's going to be okay. And I remember looking at him and saying, you don't know that. It's not. You don't understand. You're a middle-aged white guy. And I'm not going to get pregnant again at this point in my life, but my first thought was like, it makes me feel worthless. It makes me feel absolutely disposable.
Yeah.
Because this idea of protecting something is so great in the mind of some people that the person attached to that pregnancy seems completely and utterly disposable.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Right. There's times where, you can only save the mom. And with this whole, one or the other approach, it's okay, well, we want to try to save the kid, aka both people will be passing in this situation.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make any healthcare sense at all.
No.
And I think from what we've covered here, I really just feel having these options to us is definitely healthcare.
It is 100%. Abortion is healthcare.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to. It's healthcare. It is something that is imperative in caring for people, being able to provide options to everyone. And taking healthcare choices away isn't good for anyone. It hurts everybody. Yeah. It really does. It hurts some people more than others, but it hurts everybody.
Yeah. The thing that kind of surprised me when Roe v. Wade was turned over is that there was just so much of a deafening silence from any healthcare perspective. It boggled my mind where we're just like, oh, this is a huge aspect to healthcare and reproductive rights.
Yeah.
We're just gonna ignore that happened and just kind of hopefully.
It was absolutely. It was weird. I kind of waited to sort of hear some official announcement, from the various healthcare systems, and nothing.
Yeah, nothing from the systems, nothing from the government. Just kind of this is normal.
Kind of like, it was bizarre.
Yeah, I didn't like it. That was really disappointing. What do you anticipate the future to look like if these current trends continue?
I'm terrified to even think about that question, to be honest. Yeah. I think more states are going to feel this sort of brazen power to take rights away from people. So I think sadly, I think we're going to see more impact on abortion rights. I think we're going to see, and we already are seeing, impact on trans healthcare, support of trans people, which frankly falls under my general scope of practice as well.
Yeah.
I don't currently have the ability or privilege of doing trans healthcare, but there are midwives and OBGYN physicians all over the world that do that.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a problem. I think it's going to be harder for people to get medication. It's going to be harder for people to get treatment and surgery. Yeah. I am not normally sort of a disastrous in my thinking.
Doom and gloom?
Yeah. And I try not to think about the snowball effect or a slippery slope, but I do get concerned about certain things like contraception. So do I think that they're going to take all birth control away? No, but I worry about things, for instance, like a copper IUD. Mm-hmm. So a copper IUD is a great non-hormonal birth control option for people.
Yeah.
The way that it works generally is it, sort of inhibits the sperm from being able to get to the egg and fertilize it. But it also creates a bit of a hostile environment in the uterus so that if there was an egg that got fertilized, it generally probably wouldn't be able to implant. Mm-hmm. There are some people that look at that mode of action and say, well, that's an abortion.
Yeah.
And we can use them also for emergency contraception. So, for instance, in fact, it's one of the most effective forms of emergency contraception.
I know that.
Yeah. So if somebody came in like in 3 days, prior had unprotected sex and they were like, oh man, screwed up.
Yeah.
What can I do? The morning after pill is only good for roughly 72 hours. You can sometimes do it later, but you can throw a copper IUD into someone. And Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's really funny.
Thank you.
Yeah, dad jokes, inheritance in the Y chromosome. I see. Don't have to even be a dad. Yeah, exactly. So it's a great option, and I think, man, I wonder if we'll be able to do that.
Yeah.
I wonder if that'll be an option.
Right.
So I think that there are a lot of things that could happen. I mean, if you had asked me 10 years ago, do you think Roe v. Wade will ever be overturned? I would have laughed at you.
Well, it was a Supreme Court decision.
Yes.
And I think maybe I don't know enough about our history, our law, but I feel like this is the first time in my life where a Supreme Court decision was overturned by a future Supreme Court.
Yes.
And
unthinkable.
Right. And there, I in my head, I was like, well, it sets the precedent. Like if you all of a sudden are starting to overturn Supreme Court decisions as a Supreme Court,
yeah,
you're just like negating the entire history.
You are. You're basically saying like, I don't like it. Let's change it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a bizarre thing, but it just shows how many things have become political.
Yeah.
I mean, who would have thought that vaccinations would become political?
Yeah.
Who would have thought, that's the other thing that I think is going to change and has changed. So COVID, that pandemic, definitely, I saw a huge impact on vaccination rates. Mm-hmm. So people became, some people became very untrusting of that particular vaccination because they felt like it was approved too quickly and given too quickly.
Sure.
And what I saw was this sort of rolling fear into other vaccines. Mm-hmm. So, I don't have numbers to reflect it. Someone would maybe have this fear that the mRNA vaccine was dangerous, and then they became less trusting of the flu vaccine. And then they were like, well, okay, I'm not doing those, so maybe I won't vaccinate my baby against measles or mumps or polio. And I think that began, 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. I think that with our current cabinet in the government, I think that that's only going to continue.
Yeah.
And that concerns me for sure.
Absolutely.
I do believe in autonomy. I think everybody needs to make decisions for their own bodies and their children's bodies. And I think if you have looked at all your options and you're well educated in what the risks and benefits mm-hmm. of things are, you should be able to make those decisions for yourself. But I get concerned about what's going to happen in terms of trusting science and trusting medical professionals. And we don't always get it right.
No. But that's like the beauty of science with, scientific method.
Yeah.
We have a theory. We're 99% sure it works. But if for some reason there's that 1% that proves it wrong, and it's repeatable,
then we revise it. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of science. And it's just difficult. There's a lot of distrust out there about the medical field. Yeah. I find it as, people who essentially are holding their nose and coming to see me for care because they're like, I don't really know.
Yeah.
And usually we're able to really like come to a beautiful place of understanding and compromise and whatnot. But I worry about how that's going to continue, especially with RFK in charge of stuff. So.
A thing that I like to think about is whenever we have a procedure of any kind, there's this consenting situation where we have to have our patient consent.
Yeah.
But firstly, we have to go through the risks and benefits of everything. And I feel like with this becoming such a polarizing facet, there's going to be just deaf ears. So you can't give them the full spectrum of we kind of eradicated measles and polio and all these things.
Yeah, they're showing up again.
It's just like all of a sudden they're upset at you even suggesting it. And that's a future that I fear for, I think.
Yeah. One way I've sort of tackled that a little bit is, this might sound silly, but I ask consent to be able to have the conversation with them.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll ask permission. I'll be like, I understand you feel this way, and I am not challenging you on that. Would it be okay with you if I gave you my perspective or at least shared some information with you, if anything, just to make me feel better that I've done my job and that I've covered things? And almost always people are like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
And then we have a conversation, and sometimes they change their minds and sometimes they don't, and that's okay. But I feel like the seed has been planted, they've heard the information, and we can move on.
Right.
So, I think how we handle that as healthcare providers is really important too.
Yeah.
Because if we go too far the other direction, if we just get pissed off and we bitch about, the quote unquote anti-vaxxers, I think that's really doing a lot of harm. Right. And it's doing a disservice because it's, first of all, it's labeling people. Second of all, it's generalizing about a group of people because everyone has different reasons. Mm-hmm. Somebody may not want to vaccinate their kid because maybe their other kid did have a reaction and something terrible happened. Mm-hmm. Or maybe they mistakenly think that a vaccine is going to cause autism. Okay. But, I think that it's important for us to come about it and approach it with respect and with sort of a collaborative attitude in order to really understand where people are coming from.
Yeah. Well, and it leaves the door of communication open.
Yeah.
Where if you come at I'm going to lecture at you, they're going to climb up and
as they should,
or go down their rabbit hole.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that you do that. That you're just I hope that you can accept that we have this conversation. Is that okay? Yes. Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah.
And a thing that I find interesting is that a lot of people will, even if they are against science or whatever else, they will look to a hospital as their last resort. I've gotten this far and I feel like I'm dying. What am I going to do in this situation? And not necessarily the vaccines, but other things.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah. So it's as someone that works in healthcare, it's harder for me to really I want to keep that door open as much as I can.
Yeah.
But it's super frustrating to have the same person back because they never take their meds.
Sure. Yeah, and I don't see that as much. What I see, so it's really interesting. We will often, no, I shouldn't say often. We will sometimes get home birth transfers where someone was planning, an intended home birth, and there might have been some complication where the midwife attending them and the patient are aware that the safest thing for them to do now would be to change plans and come into the hospital. And again, how we approach that is so important. It'd be really easy to be dismissive and angry and whatnot. But my attitude is you're here. I know you don't want to be here. This was not part of your plan. But how can we make this experience for you as much of what you want it to be? And still get your baby out safely.
Yeah.
And I think, again, how we approach that is so important because alienating the home birth community isn't doing anyone any favors.
No.
Criticizing someone for making a certain choice isn't doing anyone any favors, including ourselves.
Right.
It just makes us look really paternalistic, and I don't really love that. So.
No. Yeah, and I feel with voting results and numbers like that, I wonder how much of a detriment being judgmental and or stereotypical, just clustering people, kind of hurts the Democratic Party in general.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yep. It's probably becoming apparent how I feel about politics, and that's fine. I don't hide behind that. I'm definitely pretty liberal on most things.
Yeah.
But yes, I think the Democratic Party needs to have a real wake-up call and get really serious about thinking about, okay, what candidates are we putting out there? How are we actually listening to people and taking care of people? Because that's not happening right now.
No. Yeah.
Really, neither party is making me real thrilled at the moment.
Yeah, right.
And it's difficult. It's really difficult.
Yeah.
I
feel isolated.
Yep.
As far as that stuff goes, which is kind of, the reason.
I feel helpless, and it's difficult because that's not something I'm used to feeling.
Right.
I was pretty upset about the recent election results, and, I kind of licked my wounds for a day or so, and then I was like, all right, I need to get back in the trenches and do something about it. And I know I can't change national politics, but what I can do is I can be really kind to people.
Yeah.
And I can reach out and connect to people in my own community and hope that sort of that little pebble in the lake will trickle out and that those ripples will affect other people and affect other people. I've seen it happen in this community with things like Beer by Bike Brigade and all these wonderful organizations that are really making amazing things happen. And it really helped me realize that you just need to sort of have an effect where you can have an effect. And for me, that's my town. And this place is filled with wonderful human beings that want to do wonderful things. And so I just kind of have been tackling it one patient at a time in my exam rooms and birthing rooms and saying, okay, you know what? I can't unfortunately change what happens to that little girl in Texas, but I can help this person who is right in front of me and hopefully make a difference in their life. So
I think that micro perspective where what we can do locally,
focus small,
is a much more healthy way to process this situation, just because there is so much out of our control. And I've seen it where people will just marinate in front of the television.
Yeah.
And like doom scroll. And
become Facebook warriors. And I'm like, you're not really helping anything.
Yeah.
And I get it. Like I had the same sort of desire in some ways to share my feelings or whatnot, but I'm not going to let the joy get sucked out of my life because something bad happened.
Right.
You know, because to me, that's letting them win. You know, that's sort of saying like, well, look at,
how are you?
You know, I'm like, no, I'm going to go on and I'm going to seek joy in my life and I'm going to love people and I'm going to do all the things and continue to be a good person and be kind. I think that's really important.
Trying not to worry about the things out of your control.
Yeah.
Because there's so many.
Most of them actually.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Go figure.
Yeah. So it's nice to be able to have that control and also like having that conversation and comfort in other people near you in your community.
Yep.
And seeing the outreach that happens there.
Yeah. We did it. Speaking of that, I think it was only 2 weeks after the election. We had already had a house concert planned at our place. So we'll do these like we'll invite local musicians in to perform music and invite friends and everybody chips in and all the money goes to musician. It's a really cool little kind of locally grown thing. And we had one planned already. I didn't even really think about the fact that it was shortly after the election, but it was interesting because it was, a house full of about 30 people. Somehow all of us happened to be very like-minded in terms of, how we felt about the election results. And something really beautiful happened that night. There was this real sense of communion, this real sense of like fellowship in terms of a group of people who were all feeling kind of sad and devastated were coming together for a common cause, which was to just listen to some music and drink some beers and have some fun. And like the little conversations that happened were really important and unique and beautiful. And I think it was a perfect example of how building community makes people stronger. And everyone left that night, kind of saying like, my gosh, this was amazing.
Yeah.
And it was really just because we let people be themselves, right? And brought people together in a setting that had nothing to do with politics.
No.
It was beautiful. It was really interesting to reflect on that the next day.
Yeah. That's cool. There's this concept, the overall concept.
Shared grieving is half the sorrow.
Is to try and share your experience of that person with everyone else and like share stories and try to emphasize or have empathy towards whoever is impacted. But I think one of my favorite funerals I ever went to was this person passed and we passed around a microphone to everybody and just be like, what's your favorite memory of
love that.
And it was very beautiful. But like being able to have like that community bounce back or just talk about the things because there is a deafening silence, so it's nice to be able to talk about the things.
Absolutely. And that brought you all together, and many of you didn't know each other, but look at you have this shared experience of this one person who touched all of your lives.
We all love Norma. She's great.
That's sweet.
So what is the most important thing to you and your patients? Like, what do you wish your patients knew or know? That's a really good question. And this maybe comes back to something I already hit on a little bit. I think it's incredibly important for patients to understand that they have autonomy. I think it's incredibly important for them to understand that they have choice. They should have choice, and they should have a say in their medical care. So, I kind of jokingly, half jokingly, will say this to patients. Sometimes I'll say, listen, they'll ask me, can I do this or can I not do this? And I say, you can or can't do anything you want or don't want because ultimately you are hiring me to do a job for you. Really, I'm your employee. You are paying a fee and hiring me to use my expertise and training and experience and education to give you care and to give you options and choices. And then ultimately it's up to you what you do with that. You could walk away and go have your baby in a barn. Or you could, ask for an elective C-section, maybe neither, which of those things I am like thinking is a great idea. But ultimately you get to choose. And I think that we have taken so much of the power away from people in healthcare.
that people don't understand that they have power to ask questions,
Right.
and to challenge things sometimes. We don't always get it right.
Right.
I wish we did. That would be wonderful. But there's been times where patients have maybe pushed back, on something I've said, or they've corrected something I've said. And it's really interesting because, of course, my first response is to want to get defensive. But then I internally say, nope, stop, listen, learn.
Yep.
And oftentimes they're right.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. It's a really, really cool thing. So I think it's really important for patients and providers and nurses and everyone to remember that a patient has autonomy. They are a person with a brain and a heart and an entire ability to make decisions on their own. We don't own them.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and especially like from a healthcare perspective, what every Monday is to us is their once in a lifetime scary shit.
Exactly.
And it's hard to, I feel like we can, like me as a nurse, I can get lost in all of my tasks that I have for the day.
Of course. Because there's a lot of them.
Yeah. Sometimes the patient ratios are a little nuts, and I feel like I'm rushing through all of the things, and they might not fully understand the procedure that's happening.
Yeah.
Or they might just not feel comfortable about anything that's happening.
100%.
And, it's my job to realize, get out of my little grinding house.
Yeah.
And sit down and let's chat for a while. We'll figure this out. And I feel like some of the most rewarding experiences that I've had are the ones that is sort of like this, where we both just sit down and what's up?
Yeah.
What are you feeling? What do you have questions about?
Yep.
And those tend to just kind of snowball into a much better relationship, one of trust, one that's I'm more comfortable telling you what's wrong. And that's the main goal. If we know all the things that are going on with you, we can try to,
Well, and then they're more likely to trust the next person who comes along too. So you've not only, created that positive impact in that moment, but you've probably opened up a door for them to be more trusting in the future. Yeah. I mean, I've had situations where something seems really laissez-faire to me. I'm like, oh yeah, the baby's got a cord around the neck. We'll just unloop that and deliver the rest of the baby. And that patient's like, my baby almost died.
Yeah.
It's like, oh no, it didn't. But to them, that sounds terrifying.
Right.
And, they don't know that 30% of babies are born with a cord around the neck. And it's almost never a big deal. But so remembering, like you said, that our typical Monday is someone else's life-changing event is really important. And I think remembering that just because it's standard everyday stuff to us, it's not to them.
No. Definitely.
Yeah, even the really simple stuff.
Yeah. That is a good point. And just the things that we have to just be careful about what we say, because it probably does freak people out. And we're this is the term that we use.
No big deal. Yeah. Exactly.
NBD.
Yeah.
Okay. We've talked kind of a lot about the stressors and a lot of the changes that have happened recently. So that's kind of a lot. I'm kind of in a little hole here. So what do you do to cope with the stress of working in healthcare, and what things in your life do you do to fill your cup?
Yeah. I cry a lot. No, I'm kidding. Sometimes I cry in my car in the parking garage every once in a while. But no, for me, it's really important to make sure that I am doing things outside of work that fulfill me as a person, because I'm going to be a better midwife if I'm a happier human being.
Yeah.
Some of that involves my family. I'm a mom and a wife, and I love that. But some of it's outside of that too. It's really been important to me my whole life, but even, as an adult with children, to make sure that I have things that are rewarding for me and me alone, and that are just mine. So I'm definitely a maker. So I like to make stuff.
Thanks for the bread.
You're welcome. Yeah. I loved it. Yeah. So really into sourdough. That was, the cliche. Someone gave me, sourdough starter during the pandemic. And cool story about that, actually, super quick. So I got it from a friend of mine, whose 2 babies I delivered, weirdly enough. But she got it from someone else who also is a nurse and was one of my preceptors when I was a brand new baby nurse 20 years ago. It was her starter. So it's kind of cool. So that bread is,
Yeah, it has a lineage.
It does.
I love that about
It's pretty cool, yeah. And I don't know how old it was before that, but it's, been going for a long time. So so I love to make things, especially food. So cooking and baking is an enormous love of mine. Just that creative process, and also gifting it to people and feeding people. That's my love language. I love to feed people and make them happy. I love to knit and crochet and do fiber arts and all kinds of stuff. I don't know. I if I'm not actively creating or making something, it's my heart's not happy. So yeah. I like to ferment things, and I used to make beer. I don't do that so much anymore, but kombucha.
Sure.
Fermenting, a lot of fermenting apparently. But it's good.
Sauerkraut too, or?
I've made it once. I need to do it again. Sauerkraut's easy. I know it's like, I tried making homemade fermented pickles, and that did not go so well.
I have failed at pickles as well.
Yeah, they were really mushy, and I think there was some mold involved that I don't think was supposed to be part of the plan. But
I've had 2 successful kimchis.
Nice. Yeah. Awesome.
I think there's like American culture trend of like work is life. Situation.
Yeah, I don't buy into that at all.
No,
thanks.
Like the whole work-life balance thing. I work so that I can live.
Yep, me too.
Not live to work. And,
absolutely.
I think that's really important for happiness. Like if you're just looking in one building for your entire life, circle around, it's just not.
Well, and I think we both love what we do.
Yeah.
So, just working to live doesn't mean you don't love your job or that you don't appreciate your career.
Yeah.
I do. I feel very fortunate to do what I do for a living, but it's also really draining and demanding. And I need to make sure that I'm balancing that with caring for myself and doing other things. Maybe that means pulling my guitar off the wall and writing a song or whatever the case may be. But
that's awesome. That's good. I think that there's something to be said for keeping your brain stimulated in different kinds of ways.
Absolutely.
And I think it helps kind of keep you young.
Yeah.
If you're consistently trying new things or having an open mind and exploring different aspects to life.
Well, how do you strike that balance? Because, your job's stressful too.
Yeah. So I like to... Well, I'm doing stuff like this. This is kind of
that's awesome.
I have a food blog that's really that's been super rewarding.
Yeah,
it's like a very good community hub where
it's right up my alley. It's so perfect.
I like that word that politics isn't part of it. It's just kind of a nice little get up and go happy place for me.
Yeah.
I also restore metal hardware, which is super fun. That's one of the more satisfying things. It's like pressure washing, but metal.
Super niche. That's cool though. I love that. Yeah.
I do that. I play video games from time to time.
Cool.
But I think we both kind of keep busy and do things.
Yeah, people are like, how do you have time to? I'm like, I make time. I don't feel like I'm any more busy than the average person. I think it's just what I choose to be busy with.
Yeah.
And I still have to clean my house and do laundry and run my kid to show choir practice and do all those things. But in between, I make sure I'm feeding my soul too. That's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Is there, do you have any website or anything for your creations?
No. I do have a Facebook page. So I do have a little cottage bakery business on the side. That's called Millie Mae Cakery. Kind of named after my daughter's nicknames. And so that's a really small business. It's pretty much mostly by word of mouth. I do have a Facebook page for that because I do custom cakes and cupcakes. And you've gotten to eat the marshmallows I made.
Those are the best marshmallows that exist.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Good to know.
I've tried a lot.
Good. Yeah, they're fun.
Yeah,
they are so fun.
Amazing. I
Unless they don't turn out then I'm throwing the pan across the kitchen. I'm like,
but it seems like you've had it honed now for a while.
Finally got it down.
Master chef.
Yeah, so that's fun. That
is cool. I'll never forget my first, I think, homemade marshmallow experience at the Sharma. Having a hot cocoa and going around the lights in Christmas time.
Yeah.
And it was just this huge honker,
Yeah, you're like, what is this? It's a pillow.
So crazy. And ever since then, I was like, I need this. I need this in my
life. Will
life.
Keep you in marshmallows for as long as I'm around.
Yeah. I will happily contribute to Millie Mae as many times as I need.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, it's funny. People be like, I've never had one. Like, I've sold them at the summer markets and stuff around here. And I finally got smart and had some samples out because people were just like, oh, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, just try it. And they're like, wow, like, I don't think I liked marshmallows.
Yeah. You could have like a hot cocoa dip dish for like them to just like.
Yeah, brilliant. There you go. Perfect. Yeah, they melt differently, and I don't know. It's pretty wild.
A thing of beauty. It can turn into just a cap to whatever you're drinking.
It's going coffee.
Yeah.
I may or may not have put one on a hot toddy before.
Yes. Of course.
It's Wisconsin. You got to get booze involved somehow.
Yeah. It's tradition.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I want to say thank you very much for coming and sharing your insights and your experience. Is there any last thoughts or things that you wish to get out there into the universe?
That's a huge question.
Yes.
No, it's okay. I first of all, thank you as well for inviting me. This has been a great experience. I would say keep doing this. I think, that's what I want to maybe put out there is I think that what you're doing is exactly what we've talked about, which is you are reaching out and finding beauty in your community. You're talking about hard things and interesting things. And I think ultimately that brings people together, and all that's going to do is make us stronger.
Yeah.
So keep up that good fight, and, keep doing the good things that you've been doing in the community, because we notice and it makes a really big impact, more than you might guess.
Thanks. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. And we will figure out our next thing. Here we go. I'm going to stop.